This is Abelardo de la Peña Jr. of La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, Director of Marketing and Communications. We welcome you to tonight's En Casa con la Plaza. It's a happy hour. Once again, every other Friday, we have Dan Guerrero, the hostess with the mostest, bringing some very special guests. But tonight, I think we have the most special guest of all. Come on in, Dan.
Oh, wow, that was quick. I was enjoying the intro, having a marvelous time here. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. You're right. Tonight we have a very special guest. This actually kicks off a really great look. All of our guests are special, every one of them. But we got a real cachet coming up. Tonight we have someone primo, which we'll talk about in a second. And then next we have Lalo Alcaraz, a political cartoonist, of course, and the Pocho Hour of Power, an amazing man who's using his art, a comic strip, for social justice. Yeah. And then we have Lucy Arnaz after him, and she will be talking, yeah, it's a little Lucy, but mostly about Desi and his Cuban heritage and how much he loved Mexico. He used to love to go deep sea fishing, or as Ricky Ricardo would say, dipsy fishing, and has a house down there that he left to Lucy, and his background will be very interesting. And then we're having a special Christmas show on December 18th, and we're not going to say who's on it, but it's going to be really fantastic. So we have some good things. But tonight was a little tough for me because this is where I do my little short intro, you know, but I was having trouble how to introduce this person. I mean, first of all, this woman has been introduced probably anywhere from 30 to 40 million times. She's been, you know, introduced by the powerful, by the famous. So what am I going to say? And I thought to myself, well, I can say this. Now, you knew I'd say something, right? I can say this, that when we're together, I am at the same time with a friend. Familia, really. She's like your favorite tia. And I am with greatness. I am with history. And it's a very interesting dual feeling there. And obviously a great privilege. So I'm just going to introduce her very simply. Please zoom in, Dolores Huerta.
Oh, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you. I'm glad you introduced me as a friend, because that's exactly the way that I feel about you.
Thank you.
I feel so wonderful knowing that I do know you and have followed you, have followed your career. And I want to just say, I want to thank you for your dedication to the Latino community. You know, but with your background, you could have gone in many, many different directions, and to know that you stick with the Latino community and bringing us all these great guests that you are interviewing, and because there's so much that we don't know about each other, and you are exploring people's individual lives, and also showing us that we are all connected.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we all say the same thing. If we don't tell our own stories, who's going to tell them?
Exactly.
You know, that's the truth. So I toast you. I'm wearing my special Dia de los Muertos for you. And I'm toasting you with my special Bloody Mary.
Oh, wow.
In the spirit of Halloween, of Dia de los Muertos, and the scariest of all, the election. Which brings me to an extra thank you for being here this weekend, because I know you personally and the Dolores Huerta Foundation are in overdrive with the election, have been for a long while. So thank you for that. Tell us all the things that the foundation has been doing.
Well, right now we have people are canvassing. They're actually going door to door. We were doing the dispenses, but they are very safe. They've got plastic shields, they've got masks, they've got gloves, and they're very careful with social distancing. They're dropping off door hangers because we have the Dolores Huerta Foundation. We do a voter guide for all of our folks, and we've got some very important propositions out there. Proposition 15. Which is going to bring in $12 billion into our school systems and into our communities that really need the money because of the pandemic. And then we're working on Proposition 21, which is another one that will allow local communities and local public agencies to be able to pass a law for rent control. And we know we have so many homeless people out there right now, and so many people are just afraid of their rents being raised overnight. And this would be a way to be able to control that. And then we're also working on Proposition 22, No on 22, and this is one for the Lyft drivers, and that will actually, Prop 22 would exempt them from labor laws like Social Security and unemployment insurance, things that the labor movement has fought so hard for so many years to make sure that workers have these minimal protections when they are workers. So we're fighting the mega millionaires and all of these propositions that we are working on right now, but we know at the end of the day that it's people power that are going to win. So we're working as hard as, we're also doing human billboarding, standing on the street corners with our signs out there saying, yes on 15, yes on Prop 21, no on Prop 22. And also we're doing phone banking. So we're like, and car caravans. So we're really being very, very active any way that we can. And we've been doing this, by the way, we didn't just start this week. We've been doing it now for a couple of months.
Oh, that I know. I find it so interesting because, first of all, I love that on the homepage of your website, it says justice is on the ballot. And that is so true more than ever this particular election, for sure. I find it very interesting that, because I know it's all about grassroots community organizing, and I was reminded, we have a great photo of you, Linda Ronstadt, and I'm tagging along when we were in Tucson back in 2010, and there we go, during SB 1070. And I remember you're coming up to Linda and me and saying, you know, we should do what we did with Bobby Kennedy and the grassroots campaign and what we did for Kennedy. And I thought at the time, how interesting, all these years later, that kind of work, of canvassing does work. And I was curious, because you just described it, you're still doing that kind of grassroots work. And it seems such a strange bedfellow in this time, this high-tech world of social media, and how you've joined those two, because I know you're also not just doing knocking on the doors, but the social media as well. And those two things work well together. They still, the grassroots campaign still works, is what I'm trying to say, right?
Well, it does. We've had a little setback because we all organize through house meetings, and that's how we establish our base. And then once you establish your base, then you have the volunteers that you need to go out there and do the work. And it's always so exciting when you see like people that have never been involved in politics before, to see them come out there, and when they see the changes that they can make. I mean, it's just, we had a woman yesterday that was actually in a walker, and she went to go join us and doing human billboarding. And then our organizer for that area said that, well, we probably have to change our plans because this woman, she wants to volunteer, but she's in a walker. And the woman said, no, just do whatever you were gonna do. I'm gonna be right there with you. And the organizer said, this really made me feel that sometimes we think people can't do this or can't do that, and we don't wanna ask them, but they're ready. And sometimes we just underestimate people because they do want to get involved and they want to do so much. And yet sometimes we don't give them the opportunities to really be able to really lift up themselves and grow themselves. And, you know, we kind of keep them down because we think, oh, they just can't do it. You know, this lady's in a walker, she can't possibly do
we should not make that decision for them. They should be able to make their own decision. I note also that everything on the website is in English and Spanish,
yes,
which is important as well, which takes me a little bit to the Latino vote, and because I always find it interesting, the Latino vote and the Latino bloc, and does that exist in terms of a unit? Because, you know, you're Chicano in Boyle Heights, and you're Cubano in Little Havana in Miami, or you're Hispanic in New Mexico. They're all very different people, but do you find that the values remain the same, so that we are indeed a bloc, or how do you deal with the Latino vote as such, which is what you're focusing on?
Well, we do have some differences, as you know, some cultural differences, but when it comes to this particular election, it's really interesting because the one thing that we have all had in common in this election is COVID-19. And COVID-19 has hit the Latino community very, very hard.
Yeah.
We've been affected more, unfortunately, more than other people. I guess with the exception of indigenous people and Black folk, we're the ones that have been most adversely affected. And so that has kind of really brought the community together. The other thing I think that we have in common is that we have had so many attacks against our community by the Trump administration. And so I think this is kind of bonded. And we are seeing, in fact, I was just on a Zoom about a half an hour ago with people down in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. And to see the numbers of people that are voting there was just amazing. And you know, and they say right now that more people have voted in Texas than voted in the last election, in the early voting.
Yeah.
More people have voted than voted in the last election. And that's pretty amazing. And especially when you see, you know, for Latinos in Texas, they can't even register to vote. They have to find a deputy registrar somewhere to register them to vote. And we got rid of that law because I had the privilege of lobbying the laws of the state of California back in 1963, over 50 years ago, that anybody who's a citizen can register somebody else to vote. So we still have a lot of work to do. And of course, like you probably heard that the governor of Texas, that they actually ruled that they can only have one ballot drop off in each county in Texas. And I mean, if you've been to Texas, you know, Texas is a really, really big state. And to think they only have one ballot drop off or mail ballots in every county is insane.
But that's the thing about this particular election. Look, a lot of it is politics as usual, misinformation and negative ads and all that. But this is, I was going to say reached a new high, but it's really reached a new low. Intimidation of voters. It's frightening is what it is. It really is.
And of course, they appealed this to the courts. And of course, it was the Trump appointees on the appellate court that said that this was okay. And they even said, nobody will be disenfranchised. Are you kidding me? If people have to drive how long just to get to the ballot box? You know, it's crazy.
And they are.
To drop off their ballots, yeah.
But as you're saying, they're waiting in line 5 hours. They might not have done that in some other election, but they really are there. It's a scary time, I have to say, but fingers crossed, and we shall see what we shall see. When President Obama presented you with the National Medal of Freedom, which is our nation's highest arts award, do you remember that day?
Oh, yes.
Well, he said something that I loved, and I want to read the quote, if I may. He said, Dolores Huerta has never lost faith in the power of community organizing. And through the Dolores Huerta Foundation, she continues to train and mentor new activists to walk the streets into history. I love that line. I love that so much. How have you kept the faith? I mean, let's face it, you've been through it all. Never mind the beatings and all the intimidations and the danger. The earliest days of the UFW, you and Caesar, had death threats. How have you kept the faith and kept going strong and positive through all these years? That's a very, not everyone could do that.
Well, actually, we know that the work that we do is all about people. You know, it's about taking away the apathy that people have, letting them know that they have power, letting them know that they can make changes, that they don't have to be wealthy, they don't have to have a college degree, or not even any kind of any kind of a degree. You know, maybe people that never got a chance to go to school. Many people never had a chance to learn to read and write even, but that they still have power. And once people understand that, and that they understand that they can actually make the changes in their lives and the changes in their community, it is such a wonderful, miraculous event that happens. And when they get involved and they see that by coming together, by taking direct action, and by the way, you can't do this by yourself. You've got to organize a group of people to do this together. But it is just, I always say that when I learned how to organize way back in the 50s, by Mr. Fred Roth Sr., who's the one that taught us how to organize, Caesar, myself, and many others, that I found that I had found a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I thought, oh my God, this is like a miracle. You mean all that we have to do is get together and take direct action, register people to vote, get them to vote, elect good, good progressives, and that's the way we make changes? It sounded so simple. And I have been reflecting on that a lot recently when we think about what we're going through here in our country. And I thought to myself, this is probably what the founding fathers of our government. Notice I didn't say our country, okay, because the country was already here. The country was here and it was brown.
I noticed, I did notice.
But the founding fathers of our government, when they talked about that we could have this kind of a nation where people could be self-governed. And of course, we know that they actually got that from the Native Americans, right? That's where they got the idea to begin with. So it wasn't a European idea to begin with. But the fact that they thought, and they really had this idea that people could govern themselves. And I was reflecting on that when I learned that, we could make things happen by getting people to vote and putting good people in office. And I thought that's what the founding fathers of the government probably thought themselves. This is such a miracle that could actually happen. And although we know that the American dream is not yet fully realized, and that it started out faulty at the beginning, but the fact that we have this idea and that people can actually make it happen, I think that is so exhilarating just to think about it.
And you've kept that exhilaration, which is amazing. But I suspect that this organizing that you say you kind of discovered in the 50s, you actually discovered, I think, way before that, because we're going to go way back. Do you remember a lovely young girl named Dolores Clara Fernandez? Remember that sweet thing?
Oh, yes.
So that was you. And you, of course, were born. Look at that. It's the same face, Dolores. If someone showed me that photo, I would know that was you. I love that photo. So you were born in a small mining town, Dawson, New Mexico. Your dad, Juan Fernandez, was a coal miner and a union organizer, and later served in the state legislature. And we're going to talk about your mom in a second, but I want to stay there for a second because I read somewhere that you as a little girl remember hearing your father talk about union organizing. Is that true? Did you really start to a little spark that early?
Well, yeah, because it was during the Depression, of course. I didn't spend that much time with my father because my mother's the one that raised us. But in those few times that I was with my dad, yes. And as you know, well, or maybe a lot of people don't know this, but the people in New Mexico are very, very political. Yeah, and they're always talking about who was running for office, who was going to get elected, and what was happening with the union movement. And so that was kind of the ambience that I grew up in. And so a lot of times we know that we have a lot of recent immigrants that come to this country, and they don't have that kind of a background like the one that I had in New Mexico. So I think that I was very, very lucky to grow up that way and knowing how important political activity is and what, So.
You do learn it all at the dinner table, don't you?
Exactly.
Good stuff and bad stuff, but that's where you do a lot of early learning. And you're right, you weren't with your dad long because your parents separated when you were about 3, and your mom, Alicia Chavez, moved you and your 2 brothers to Stockton, where you actually grew up. And she had been a cannery worker and a cook, and she was the most, look at that woman. This photo's a little later, obviously, but tell us about your mother. She influenced you and inspired you greatly, right?
Yeah, my mother was an incredible woman. She was only 30 years old when she actually, started her own business as a restaurant business. And she had a wonderful restaurant. It was a diner. And we would go into the diner after school, and my brothers would wash the dishes. I would fill up the sugar bowls, put the napkins in their different places. And but she was just incredible. And then, of course, when World War II broke out, and one of her Japanese friends asked my mother to take over her business, her hotel that she was running, because as we know, our Japanese friends were, they were incarcerated and put into these concentration camps almost overnight. And so they were desperate to find people that could help them. And so my mother, she did step up and take over her business, her friend's business when they put them into the camps. But she worked 2 jobs until she could save enough money to start her own business. She would work as a waitress in the daytime, and then at night she worked in the cannery. So, you know, my mother would come home and change the uniforms, literally from her waitress uniform to her cannery uniform. And you know, a lot of people would say, Alicia es muy ambiciosa, that my mother is too ambitious. You know, some people would criticize her, but she knew what she wanted. She knew what her goals were, and she just wanted a better life for her kids.
But at the same time, which is extraordinary, that she landed there with 2 little kids. And I know that because she was working around the clock, your abuelo would take care of you and your 2 brothers, and he had the best name ever. What was your grandfather's name?
Herculano.
Isn't that fantastic?
Herculano Chavez. Herculano Chavez, yes.
Do you have happy memories of him?
Well, he would tell us a lot of great stories. My grandfather, you know, my grandfather's mother, she came from Spain, okay? Maria de Jesus Baena. And she was actually captured by, their wagon train, they were coming from Mexico, well, it was all Mexico at that point in time. New Mexico was part of Mexico. But they were attacked by the Mescalero Apaches, and they killed all of the adults on the wagon train. So my grandmother was raised, my great-grandmother was raised by the Indians. And from the time she was 8 till the time that she was 16, she lived with the Indians. And finally, at the age of 16, she somehow got away, or I don't know how that happened, but she showed up at a Spanish village and she shouted, "Soy cristiana, soy cristiana, I'm a Christian." Because back in those days, that's what it was, Christians and pagans, right? And then my grandfather himself, he was captured by Geronimo's Indians and lived with them with the Apaches for a year. So all of this stuff was going on in New Mexico, and we know that the Native Americans were fighting to keep their land. So they had all of these wars that were going on between the settlers and the Native Americans. So all of that history is, and of course my grandfather would tell us all these great stories. Oh, by the way, my grandfather's brother, Tranquilino, was a member of Billy the Kid's gang. And so my grandfather, everybody loved Billy the Kid because they said that Billy the Kid always stood up for the Mexicanos. And that was especially, you know, when all that stuff was going on, when they were taking Texas, they were taking over Texas, and you had a lot of the Texans that were killing Mexicans and all that. And so you had all of this stuff that was a very chaotic time, I think, when my grandfather was a young man, that was everything that was going on there in the state of New Mexico.
That's incredible. New Mexico has the most fascinating history. I mean, everybody has an interesting history, but people I've talked to from New Mexico, it's quite complicated, even within what is now the state, and they're completely different cultures even between the Mexican, the indigenous, the tribal people, the Spaniards. Wow, I love New Mexico.
Yeah, there was a very good documentary that I would like to share with you, and it was on public television, and it was called "Foreigners in Their Own Lands." And it talks, and I thought I knew about how, you know, Texas became part of the United States and all of the land, you know, when that was taken from Mexico. But it's a really, really great documentary, and it includes some of the history of New Mexico in that documentary. But I would definitely recommend it to everybody, because I think it's good that we know our own history, because we often don't know our own history. And we know when we do know our history that really enriches us and gives us the dignity that we deserve, especially our young people.
And we who grew up in the 50s, you know, we were taught a very different history, of what really happened, as we know. And that was further fed to us in movies. And, you know, that's all changed since then. But we had to do a lot of unlearning of our learning, if I may say. So let's get back to you. You were, rumor has it, you were an excellent student and a Girl Scout and a flag girl. And we have living proof of that. Where's that photo? Look at that. I love that photo.
Well, that's not really a flag girl. I was a majorette
Oh, a majorette.
When you're a majorette, then you're up there and you have that baton that you see that I'm holding, you have to throw it up in the air and you have to catch it. And I was, Stockton was a really great place to grow up in. We had a Latin American drum and bugle corps, and they would, so our drum and bugle corps, which were of course all Latinos, we would win so many prizes because what they would do is that they would do all of the drum beats that the Mexican drum and bugle corps do. And of course, nobody ever heard those anywhere. And so we would always win all of the prizes. We did parades all over Northern California. And I think of myself, and I don't know how many Mexican-American majorettes that existed back there in the 40s, probably very, very few throughout the whole state of California.
I suspect so. Now you eventually went to night classes, or to school, I should say, and at Stockton College, and you got your teaching credentials, and you taught grammar school. Did you like teaching? Did you enjoy teaching? I would imagine you would.
Yeah, I loved the kids. I didn't like the other teachers.
Why not?
Well, because back in those days, you didn't have any Latino teachers. I think in all of our school district in Stockton, there were only 3 of us that were Latinos, that were bilingual in the whole school system. Later on, of course, there were a few more. But even today, Dan, I don't know whether you know this or not, but on all of the United States of America, only 2% of teachers are Latinos.
Oh, wow. 2%?
2%. And when you consider that we have, our country is browning, and how many, maybe millions of young students that we have that are Latinos, and yet we don't have enough teachers of color, especially Latino teachers.
I can't believe that figure. When I went to Garfield in East LA, I graduated in '59. We were thrilled because we had a Latina gym teacher, Miss Herrera. And it was like, whoa, we have a Latina teacher in the whole school. Our Spanish teachers were Mr. Sherman and Miss Barnhart. They were our Spanish teachers. And the Chicanos would sit there, and it wasn't all Chicanos in Garfield in the 50s. It was a very mixed school at that time. Pero please, we would sit there going, ¿Dónde está la casa? Repeat after me. ¿Dónde está la casa? It was shocking, but I guess it hasn't changed that much, and that's shocking too.
Yeah, so we have to make sure that we get more of our kids in school, and more of our kids to become teachers and nurses and doctors, and fill all of those needs, occupational needs that we need for our Latino community.
Now, I also have a quote, and I love, do you remember this great book? In fact, you ascribed it to me. This is a great book. A Dolores Huerta reader. It's incredible. It has her speeches, a quote. It's really fantastic. It's the New Mexico Press. I assume it's still available. It's a great book. Anyway, there was a quote I also liked. I've never quoted so much as I am in yours. I don't know why. When you were teaching, they say, if it's true, I couldn't tolerate seeing kids come to class hungry and needing shoes. I thought I could do more by organizing farm workers than by trying to teach their hungry children. Is that how you really, I mean, you've had a lot of farm worker children. It must have been difficult to watch them.
Yes, it was, and it was very sad. And then when I remember one particular school, actually I was teaching there when I made my decision to quit being a teacher. And the principal was actually from Arkansas. And the children were Okie kids, they were white kids. In that particular school, there were not that many Latino kids, there were mostly white kids, but their parents were also farm workers. And when I would go to my principal and say, I would like to get a voucher for shoes for these children, and he would give me an argument. He would say, oh, their parents, they just drink up all their money, and that's why they don't have enough money for shoes for the kids. And you could see that the kids were malnutrition because they were so thin. And so I just, that's what I decided. I'm just gonna quit teaching and just become an organizer. And of course, I was Mr. Fred Roth Sr., who was the one, of course, that taught both Cesar and myself and many others how to organize. I was working with Fred one day, and we were out there registering voters in front of a cannery there in Stockton. And then it was time for me to go for my teacher orientation, which you have to do, for the following semester. And I thought, well, if I leave here, I'm going to leave, Fred is going to be here by himself, trying to register all these people to vote. And so I said, you know what, Mr. Ross, I'm just gonna quit teaching and become an organizer. And of course, he loved that. All the rest of my family thought I was completely crazy to do that. But I felt that I felt it in my heart. And I'm sure you have felt this too, when you have that calling.
Yes.
And it's so strong that it is calling on you. And this is a decision that you have to make, even though it's not rational. It doesn't make any kind of sense economically. But this is what I decided to do. And I've never regretted that decision to this day.
Those light bulb moments, really life changing. You suddenly go, you know what? I don't think so, you know? And it, as you say, at that moment, it is simple. It is, that's what you wanted to do. And that was that. And you were on the right path, obviously, because you've done quite well. You've done quite well. Now, all the steps leading up to the UFW are very complicated with Fred Ross and co-founder of the Agricultural Workers Association. And I know it was a long haul, but in the interest of time, I think I just want to cut to the UFW for a minute, because what you did is extraordinary. You were a child yourself. You were still a very, very young woman. And I'm going to read this because I don't want to forget anything. But Dolores did most, if not all, of the negotiations. She did all the legislative work, lobbied for state bills, stared down the bosses, led picket lines, took the beatings, and organized the great boycotts. Goodness knows what else. But the bottom line is, she was not getting coffee for the menfolk. You were really out there, which leads me to another quote. I told you I'm like, quote, crazy tonight. But I love this because I do think it was another light bulb moment for you. And I believe it's in this book. So if it's not right, it's the book's fault. You said, at some point in my career in the union, I realized women were not being valued for what they were doing. So did that experience inspire you to add advocacy for women to what you were already doing, to your union work, including getting women elected to public office in California? Was that, as you were doing all this and yet could feel that, did that add another tributary to your journey?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, the women were always out there on the front line, on the picket lines. We had women working in all of the different offices, running our clinics. Because we had 5 farm worker clinics before we had the big fight with the Teamsters Union, doing a lot of the administrative work and, you know, running the financial departments, et cetera, but not on the executive board. And I said, there's something's wrong with this picture. And so I kind of went, and you know, my mother was a feminist, and so I had to kind of go back to my feminist roots. When I went to work with farm workers, I had to really change a lot of my behaviors. You know, in Stockton, I was very, very free. I would go to the clubs with my mother, my aunts, my girlfriends, would go dancing. And of course, I couldn't do that in Delano. You just couldn't do that, you know, working with farm workers. I couldn't dress the way I dressed in Stockton. I had to dress differently. And then at some point I realized, you know, this is a lot of just a suppression of women. And so again, and it was I had to come out and start speaking up more for women. And I do have to say these, CESA pretty much always supported women. And one time I remember somebody asked Caesar, why do you have so many women, because we had women running field offices and running, as I said, the clinics and doing all of these great work. And somebody asked Caesar, why do you have so many women doing all of these important jobs in the union? And his answer was, because they do the work.
He knew.
I thought that was such a great answer. But again, we needed women to be at the decision-making level on the board. And so before Caesar passed away, we were able to get about 40% of the board to become women. And as you know, that the current president of the United Farm Workers now is a woman, Teresa Romero, you know? So we have come a long way, baby, in making that happen. But you know, Dan, one thing I do want to kind of dial back a little bit, because your dad, Lalo, was actually one of our supporters when we first started with the Community Service Organization, the CSO. And that is, of course, where Cesar and I came out of. This is where we learned all of the tools that we needed to start the Farm Workers Union came out of the community service organization. And I remember that once at one of our conventions, and actually that convention was in Stockton, and who was our special guest for that convention but your dad?
Oh.
And I was able to, you know, with a few of us were able to get together with him afterwards and have some, after our convention and have some long platicas, some long talks with him. And I always remember that. But sometimes I know that the United Farm Workers story is very exciting with the strikes and the boycotts and, you know, martyrs that were killed and all of this of violence. But the community service organization is where we learned all of the things that we had to do to register voters. This is where we passed some of the big legislation that we passed, like getting public assistance for people that were legal immigrants to the United States of America. This was a big piece of legislation that we passed. And now throughout the whole United States of America, we have people who are legal immigrants that are being able to get aid to the blind, aid to the disabled, aid old age pension, and even Obamacare, you know? And this happened out of community service organization. And by the way, also, this is an interesting fact also, you mentioned, I know that you interviewed Eddie Olmos, but actually the way that CSO started was because of the Zoot Suit riots. Because of the Zoot Suit riots. And when that happened, Saul Alinsky from Chicago, who had he had this Industrial Areas Foundation. The city council in Los Angeles called Alinsky, and they wanted to talk to him to see what they should do about the Mexican problem.
Yeah.
And Alinsky told them, well, you have to let the people get organized. You have to organize them. And of course, they didn't want to do that. That's the last thing that they wanted. But Alinsky stayed in LA, and then him and some of his Jewish friends, they got together and they raised money to hire an organizer. And they heard about this guy, Fred Ross. And Fred Ross had worked with the Japanese when they put them into the internment camps. He had desegregated. I know that you've heard about that famous case in Orange County where they had the Mexicans segregated in one school and the white kids in the other. Right. And there's a documentary on that, Mendes versus Westminster. Well, right. Fred Ross is the one that organized the people to desegregate that place, you know? He doesn't get all that credit for it, but he is the one that organized them. And so, and he also worked here in California, right here near Bakersfield, in fact, the Grapes of Wrath, and I know you're familiar with that. And in the Grapes of Wrath, they show this kindly person that ran the camp there. That was Fred Ross Sr. And Fred Ross was there with Woody Guthrie and Henry Fonda, John Steinbeck. And that was his first connection with farm workers. So hearing about Fred Ross's great record as an organizer, that is the man that they hired. And Fred Ross went into East Los Angeles and he started the community. I mean, the community service organization had already been started, and they had ran Ed Roybal for, you know who Ed Roybal is, right? The first Latino to be on the LA City Council. Yes, yes. But they lost that election. So Fred Ross came in there and he taught them how to organize, how to do house meetings. And of course, Ed Roybal won the next election. And then Fred went throughout California. He went to San Jose and that's where he found Caesar. He came to Stockton and that's where he organized me in a house meeting. And when I remember that meeting to this day, and when he showed us all of the pictures of the newspaper clippings of all of their accomplishments and seeing 100 people in a room, I had never seen a meeting that big. And then how he told us about how they had actually sent police to prison for beating up those Mexican kids in the zoot suits, right? And that was, I thought, I want to belong to that organization. So I had to always want to give credit to to Fred Ross Sr., because he's the one that taught us how to organize. And they do have a picture of him there in the museum. And I am so happy that he is acknowledged. I like to call him the gringo godfather of the Chicano movement.
And he deserves that. You know, those unsung heroes, people don't know about him. I know about him only because of our friendship and people, but most people don't know who that is. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he was not seeking attention but no. We need to honor those that walked before us. I mean, when you bring up Dad, I remember he called me one day, Dolores, and he goes, "Mijo, I've never written a corrido for Dolores Huerta." Why all of a sudden that day it hit him? I have no idea. Because of course he had written one very early on for Caesar. And I said, okay, so I'm going to write one. And of course he did. And in fact, I sent you through Alicia or Juanita, one of your daughters, the lyrics in his own handwriting, which it is a beautiful corrido, but he was shocked that one day se le prendió el foco that he had never written a corrido for you. We didn't want you to be an unsung hero, which happily you are not.
Well, I was very fortunate to be with your dad several times, and we did a few events together. So it was probably after one of those events that you decided to write the corrido.
I want to back up a second. You must have been very close with your brothers. Were you close growing up with your brothers? Since, you're moving to Stockton, you were little and your mom working, it must have bonded you more than ordinary circumstances, perhaps. Were you close to your brothers?
Yeah, I was very close to them. Of course, my younger brother and I used to fight a lot.
That's part of it.
And then, my mother remarried, and then I have two sisters also, my sister Alicia and my sister Elena. But they were much younger than I was. So it was my brothers and myself. And of course, my mother was so wonderful. And so I was able to go to dances when I was only 15 years old. And we would go from Stockton to San Francisco. And as long as one of my brothers was with me, I had a lot of freedom, which a lot of young Latinos don't get that type of freedom. My mother was a very liberated woman, and she allowed me to have a very wonderful, wonderful childhood.
That's wonderful. She was an amazing lady. And through all this, we have a few family photos because, believe it or not, through all this, most of you some of you may know that Dolores Huerta has 11 children. She had 11 children in the middle of all this. So, and I want to do a shout out to your daughter, Alicia, and to your friends, Maria Elena Chavez and Rafael Rodriguez, who sent us some of these photos. Now, this is Mother's Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I see Alicia there in the glasses, and I see Juanita. Who else? Who's that little baby? Is that a what is that? Grandchild, great-grandchild sitting in your lap?
I have to put on my glasses to see who it is. Yeah, but you see my oldest granddaughter that's there. Her name is Deneen John. She's right there next to my son, Fidel, who's in the yellow shirt. And my son Fidel is a doctor, by the way. And next to him is my first granddaughter, Deneen Johns. And now I can't see who that baby is. It's one of my.
How many grandchildren do you have?
Right now I have, I think, let me think. I think I have 9 grandchildren, and I have probably about 8 or 9 great-grandchildren.
Wow. And then we have another photo of with a couple of your boys, your sons. This is like in 1962.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's my son, Emilio, Fidel, and let's see, which is this? Which one is this?
I love all the pearls. You're very fancy there.
Yeah, that's when I go. I could see Emilio with his big eyes right here. Oh, this is my son, Vincent, right here. Vincent, who's a chef. He's a wonderful chef, by the way, Dan.
Oh, wow.
Over the pandemic is over, we'll get him to cook a good meal for us.
Is he in LA? Where is he?
Oh, he's in San Diego, but unfortunately he got into real estate, but he's still a great cook. Wow. And the other one is Fidel. Fidel, my 3 sons, Fidel, Emilio, and Vincent. And then I have a younger son, Ricky, by the way, who is much younger. He was born, and Ricky, by the way, is a great entertainer.
Oh.
Yeah, he's a great performer. He should be a comedian, but he also used to do a lot of hip hop.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I remember you're telling me about your hip hop son.
He's a poet.
Wow. Then we have another photo with your kids. I think this is also in the 60s. Do we have one more, Abelardo? I love this one.
Oh, this is in Delano. And this, yeah. I think it's, oh, wait a minute. Maybe not. This is my sister, Elena. My sister, there's Vincent there. And Emilio, my daughter, Lori. And my daughter, Celeste. And I think that's my daughter, Angela, in my lap. She was the baby then.
Oh, she's really tiny.
And this is just a friend.
She is tiny. And then knowing that you start your family early, we have your grandchild, Gabriel. Look at that. So everybody, I remember Juanita once telling me, oh, by the time we were 8, we were off to the supermarket with leaflets and
Yes. And actually, we had Angela, my daughter, who, by the way, she's a nurse now, an oncology nurse. And my daughter, she was only 6, and she was actually passing leaflets and telling people, don't buy the grapes because they've got pesticides on them. And she turned away more people than anybody else. And she was only 6 years old. Yeah.
When I was producing for television, every time we'd have crew tables in those days, we'll never see crew tables again. And I'd always say, no grapes on the crew tables. And you know, PAs would go out there and go, oh my God, there's grapes, get rid of those grapes. And they'd be throwing grapes in the garbage before we'd come out to the no uvas. I know I think we have a lot of questions from people who have been zooming in. But before we go to that question, first of all, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. And I like one more quote, your quote. In fact, I use it in my activism and the arts presentation that I do. And it's really a call to arms, and we need it more than ever. So I will quote you here. Every person is a potential activist. Every moment an organizing opportunity. Every minute a chance to change the world. And I believe that. You believe it.
I absolutely do. That's why I always say to everybody, talk to somebody, you know, tell them stories. We know that sometimes people are just waiting to be invited to join the movement, but nobody ever asks them to do that. And sometimes people, you know, they just don't believe that they can make a difference. You know, Helen Keller said that apathy is the biggest evil that human beings have, you know, and something that science has never been able to correct or to cure. But we as organizers, that's what we do. We try to remove people's apathy and get them involved, letting them know that they can make a difference and that they can also change the world to make the world a better place.
We love you, Dolores, so much. I think we have some questions here. Abelardo?
Yes, we do. Well, thank you very much, Dolores. That was incredible. Great stories. Thank you, Dan, for facilitating this. 11 children, and amazing, and so many grandchildren. Dan always razzes me because I have a few grandchildren, but not as many as you do.
Well, considering how many children I have, you would think I would have more grandchildren than what I have. But anyway, I'm very grateful for the ones that I do have.
All right. Well, we do have some questions here. Let's see. From David Ramos. Hello, if possible, could you expand on the importance of the collaboration between Filipinos like Larry Ituong and Mexican Americans during the farm workers movement?
Well, that partnership was very important. I actually organized Larry Ituong when I was organizing the Agricultural Workers Association in Stockton before Cesar and I organized the United Farm Workers. And I had a really good Black organizer, an Okie organizer, a Mexican organizer. And I said, I've got to find a Filipino organizer. And so in Stockton, luckily we had a very, very ethnically diverse city. And I had a lot of Filipino friends. So I kept asking everybody, who would be a good person to help me organize Filipino farm workers? And everybody mentioned this one person, Larry Ituong. So I decided to go find Larry Ituong. And I finally found where he lived, and I went to his house. And I had a meeting with Larry. I had a house meeting with him. I told him what I was trying to do and asked him if he would join. And he said yes. And so, you know, so Larry and I worked together to form that first group. And then that first group that we organized, the Agricultural Workers Association, they sent somebody out from the AFL-CIO. And when they saw that we had a couple of hundred people, they were so impressed that they sent an organizer. And so we were all working together with this organization that we had. It became the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. And everything was going fine But then they started working with the labor contractors. And so, you know, the labor contractors around the Mexican labor contractors are not that great. The Filipinos had a whole different system of working. And what they would do is they would always have their own cook, and they would negotiate their own wages separately with the growers. So they always got a little bit more money than the other workers did. So, but when I saw that they were working with the labor contractors and they were starting to deduct money from the workers' wages, but they hadn't really gotten any kind of a wage increase. And so I left the group. I left the Agriculture Workers Organizing Committee. And that's about that same time, Cesar had a similar experience where he organized workers in Oxnard, turned them over to another union. And then of course the group dissolved, it fell apart. And so it was at that point that Cesar said, we've got to do this ourselves. If not, farm workers are never going to have a union. And by the way, everybody, this week, the Governor Gavin Newsom declared Larry Young Day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Larry was a very, very strong leader. Mm-hmm.
All right. We have another question from April Mayorga. I recently saw your depiction in the film about Gloria Steinem. Mm-hmm. What was it like advocating for women's rights then versus now? And how can women continue to fight for equality?
Well, it was wonderful working with Gloria Steinem, you know, because although I felt I was a feminist, I had big problems with the whole issue of abortion. And because being raised a Catholic, and I know a lot of Latino families, you know, wrestle with this issue right now, even today, in evangelical families, because of what we have been told by the church. So it wasn't until with Gloria Steinem and another feminist leader, Eleanor Smeal, who was the head of the Feminist Majority Foundation, which I, by the way, am now on that board, that I realized that women have that right to decide how many children they want to have, and that nobody should interfere with that right. And so this is what we call women's reproductive rights. If women decide that they don't want to have any children, that is their right. And nobody should dictate to them or tell them if they, for whatever medical reasons, they have to have an abortion. That is their right. And you know, women have to control their own bodies. If women cannot control their own bodies, they cannot even control their lives. So that's just a very essential belief. And and we know that, and I like to quote Coretta Scott King, who said that we will never have peace in the world until women take power. And I really do believe that. And right now in the U.S. Congress, I think we only have 36 women in the U.S. Congress. So we've got to keep working until we have gender equity, not only in the U.S. Congress, but also in every business, you know, every nonprofit, everywhere. We as women need to be equals in numbers on all of those boards where decisions are being made. I like to say, if we do not have feminists, and by the way, I changed the word from women to feminists because I know that a lot of men out there are feminists also, because they believe in women's reproductive rights and immigrant rights and environmental rights, etc. So, so if we do not have equal numbers of feminists on the board, guess what? They're gonna make the wrong decisions, okay?
We have a question here from Indira Jimenez. What words would you share with the new generation who are facing this upcoming election?
Vote.
I want to say to all the young people out there that when we say vote as if your life depended on it, it does. When we think of global warming, and we have to think of the pandemic and all of these things, the lack of equitable education, the lack of income equality. We have to vote as if our life depended on it. And it's going to be up to all of you, especially the young people, to go out there and to fight so that we can make sure that we really have a society of justice, racial justice, gender justice, environmental justice, you know, justice in our law enforcement, all of these things that we have to fight for. And you young folk out there, you are so lucky because you have so many tools to organize that we didn't have when we started. And that is your cell phone, your internet, your TikToks and your Instagrams and all of the great things that you have that will help you do that. So, you know, we have to just keep fighting and keep organizing and keep working, and we can make it happen.
Don't forget, we also have Zoom. From Violeta Zamora, how do you feel or see how civic education can play a critical part in communities and for Latinos and other people of color?
Yeah, we have to get civic education back into our curriculums. We have to get ethnic studies and gender studies, you know, and labor studies. We have to include that in what we teach our children, starting with kindergarten, because we know children are not born racist, you know, and we have to teach little boys that gay women are not sex objects, and we have to teach them about the third gender also, so people are not, our little kids are not homophobic either. And we can do this with our children, but we have to kind of change our whole educational system and start teaching kids the things that they need to know. The one thing is we do not want to grow any more neo-Nazis or white supremacists in our country, you know. And even with the Latino community, you know, we have got to learn how we can celebrate our darkness and not our whiteness, you know. So, you know, go back to our indigenous roots and the things that the indigenous people really cared about, like sharing and caring for each other, protecting each other, protecting our land. And so this is what we have to do, go back to our indigenous values, and we can make it happen, especially with our young people.
All right, and one last question here from William Bacon. Do conservative Latinx groups that you encounter agree with your cause, considering that your opponents often label labor movements as socialist and politicize them?
Well, I think that word, the S word, is kind of thrown around a lot, and nobody bothers to explain it. And when we think in the United States of America, what do we have? We have Social Security, you know, where we all pay into a system so that people, when they become older, that they will have some money to live on. We all pay taxes. We all pay insurance. These are all social systems that we have already in our country. And there's nothing wrong, I think, with everything being shared equally. I just referred to that in terms of our indigenous roots. But right now, that word is being used as a scare tactic, the word socialist. And I think half the time people don't even know what it means. Robert Kennedy Jr. once said that when you have corporations that control the government, that is fascism. And that's another scary word. And we think fascism, I mean, how can you say that in the United States? And yet when we look at the police brutality that we have, when we think of the people that we have, the mass incarcerations that we have, when we see like what happened this week when Stephen Miller, one of Trump's closest allies, is coming out against immigrants in a very, very hard way. This happened just a couple of days ago. This is fascism. And Robert Kennedy said, when workers control a government, then that is socialism. Because basically socialism just means using all of the resources of your country to take care of everybody. And in Europe, they have the socialist governments. And what do they have that we don't have? Free healthcare, free education for everybody. So I, for one, am not afraid of the word socialist. But I think that people have to learn more about it and look at the governments that are socialist and see what they have that we don't have.
All right, and one final question here from Brenda Asensio. What would you want America to look like 20 years from now, socially and politically?
Well, I would love to see a world where, again, our resources of the United States are shared by everyone. We are the richest country in the world. And so when we say that we can't have healthcare for everyone, or we can't have free education for everyone, we actually can have all of those things. And that's what we need to do. We need to share the wealth equally so that we do not have poor people, and so that we don't have children in cages or children separated from their parents, the 500 children right now that have been separated. And so we have to have good governance. And so we've got to elect more progressive people to government because they are the ones that make the laws that govern our lives and govern our communities. And we can make this happen. We started this conversation talking about, you know, how elated I was when I found that you could change things, but just by registering people to vote and getting them to vote. And so that is the magic actually that we have in our country, but we really got to implement it and exercise it. I like to say it's like a football game. If one of the teams doesn't show up, the team that shows up, they win. The team that didn't show up, they lose. And so that's what we have to do. We have to just show up and really believe in ourselves that we are the ones that can make the changes, but we just got to do that civic work that needs to be done.
Well, I think we need to ask you this one because it's from someone named Skylar Chavez. What do you believe is the #1 way to decrease anti-immigration beliefs in America?
Well, a lot of the ignorance that we have, or like I should say, a lot of the hatred that we have in the United States comes from ignorance. And so one of the folks that just asked the question was about education. And I really do believe that this is where we have to start, right in our school system, educating and getting rid of a lot of this ignorance that we have. And, you know, I'm going to say a word too that I'm just going to mention, and the word is bananas. Why that word bananas? Because when you think of all of the bananas that we consume every day in the United States of America, but that money does not go to Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador, where the refugees are coming from. The money goes to Dole Banana, Chiquita Banana, the 50 banana companies, and it doesn't go to the people that produce the bananas. And so we have to take a whole different look about how our country treats our neighbors to the south. And instead of the United States exploiting all of these other countries, we should be using our talents to help them to develop their own economies. And in terms of our immigration system, a young Guatemalan man recently said, you know, we are on our own land. You know, we are the indigenous people of the continent. The real immigrants are the ones that came from Europe. Okay, they're the real immigrants. But we know that in the United States that we have had a legalization of every single immigrant that came to the United States. So when we talk about that we need another amnesty law, another immigration reform bill, it's nothing new. It's what we've been doing for the last, since the government of the United States was established. We have been, you know, giving our immigrants the right to legalize and a path to citizenship. So now it's about time that that happens again. And of course, Joe Biden has said that he will work on that. He will protect the dreamers. He will protect the people with temporary status and start working on immigration reform. Si se puede, we can make it happen again.
Well, thank you so much.
You stole that from Obama, si se puede.
Well, actually, when I first met President Obama, that's the first thing he said to me. He said, I stole your slogan. And I told him, yes, you did.
He did, and we all knew it long before he did, I suspect, but he did fess up, so that's good. That's good. If you want to support Dolores Huerta, and we all must, and you want to support the foundation, just Google Dolores Huerta Foundation. It will come up. It's very important, the work they are doing, the work that Dolores is doing. It's been an honor, my friend. You and I always find an excuse to dance at some point. So I'm hoping that we can dance again together soon.
Hopefully. And it's DoloresHuerta.org. That is our website, DoloresHuerta.org. Or you can also do joindhf.org for Dolores Huerta Foundation. And I want to thank you, Dan, and I hope we can see each other soon in person and dance together, sing together, and have a little shot of tequila together.
All right, mija. We all love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everybody, don't forget to vote.
Vote.
Yes on 15, yes on 16, please. Yes on 21. Okay, 15, 16, and 21. No on Prop 22. We got to let those Uber drivers have the protections of the labor laws, like minimum wage and Social Security, unemployment insurance. Si se puede. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. Thank you all. Thank you, Abelardo.
Thank you. Let's give a shout out, of course, once more to Dan and to Dolores for being our special guest. All of you out there who tuned in today. We have so many people. Sydney Schultz, thank you. We have people from Hawaii who tuned in. We have, let's see, Dolores Huerta from Maddie Julian says, Dolores Huerta is a fucking rock star. Thank you, Dolores. People power. Claremont, California. Lydia de los Rios from Claremont hasta La Victoria. Gracias, Dolores and Dan. So many fans out there. Arriba las mujeres from Henrietta Hurtado. Chispa Hill says, thank you for endorsing Chris Butzer for Congress. CA08 needs all the help we can get. There's a lot of activity going on this weekend. This is the weekend that we're all going to get together so that if you haven't filled out your ballot and turned it in, there's still a little bit of time. Dan, Nick, we'll see you again in a couple weeks with the great Lalo Alcaraz,
Right.
Tacayo. And then after that, Lucy Arnez. And if you check on laplazala.org, you could catch all of our En Casa con La Plaza sessions. You could catch this one if you came in late. You could catch this session. We're recording it. We'll be posting it on our YouTube page in a couple hours at La Plaza LA, our Facebook page at La Plaza LA, and on our website, lapca.org. Thank you to our sponsors, SoCal Gas and California Humanities. And thank you once more, Dan. And thank you so much, Dolores Huerta, the great Dolores Huerta.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Buenas noches a todos.
Thank you, Abelardo.